delighted that you have a show because you're fresh, you're funny, you're great. And I want you to know something. From my heart, I never liked...
Don Rickles was more than just a comedian. He was a stage assassin whose graceful art of the roast made Hollywood both tremble and laugh. But behind the laughter, a bitter truth lay hidden. There were people he genuinely hated and would never forgive. In his twilight years, Rickles unexpectedly pulled back the curtain on a secret he'd kept his entire life, a shocking blacklist. It included a talentless man who lucked his way into politics, an overly worshipped star who lacked true substance, and even a close friend whose career was directly tied to the mafia underworld. The questions are, why did Rickles stay silent for decades? And what made him choose to reveal everything in the final days of his life? Don Rickles rose to prominence in the 1950s and 1960s when Las Vegas became America's entertainment capital. With his no-holds-barred insult comedy, he quickly became one of the most prominent comedians in the country. For decades, Rickles was a familiar guest on major talk shows, especially The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, where he would unhesitatingly fire away at any star sitting next to him. The nickname Mr. Warmth that the public gave him sounds affectionate, but it was actually ironic on stage. Rickles was anything but warm. He dissected everything from appearance, race, and habits to careers with sharp, biting wit. Yet strangely, it was this graceful cruelty that made audiences go wild while his victims still laughed and accepted his attacks. Rickles passed away in 2017 at the age of 90, leaving a brilliant legacy in American comedy. But behind that legend, few knew this. Not everyone he used for laughs on stage was just a joke. There were people Rickles truly despised to his core, and every sarcastic jab was a real knife aimed directly at them. 1. Clint Eastwood, a dazzling but empty icon. While most of Don Rickles' victims came from the political or comedic spheres, Clint Eastwood was a special case. He was one of the few movie stars to become a favorite target of Rickles. To Rickles, Eastwood was just a quiet actor with a one-dimensional acting style, yet somehow he was hailed as Hollywood's iconic man. On a Las Vegas stage, Rickles once delivered a devastating blow. Clint, you have two expressions. One is a scowl, the other is a deeper scowl, and that's how you become a Hollywood legend. The audience roared with laughter, while Eastwood, known for being reserved and serious, only offered a cold smirk. But in Rickles' eyes, that reaction only proved his point. Eastwood wasn't a good actor, but simply a face that knew how to scowl at the right moment. Rickles repeatedly insisted that Eastwood's career was a joke. He quipped, if he'd been born with a wide smile like Sinatra, he'd probably be selling tickets at a carnival now instead of sitting in the director's chair. Or, Hollywood turned a tall, quiet guy into a Western hero. In reality, Clint's only good at one thing, staring until his opponent runs away from boredom. In Rickles' eyes, this was an injustice to truly talented actors whom Hollywood had forgotten, but Eastwood didn't seem to care. That cold demeanor only annoyed Rickles more. Clint, if you get any colder, people will mistake you for a deep freezer. Though neither publicly hated the other every time Rickles appeared, Eastwood knew he'd be the butt of the joke in front of the audience. And every time Eastwood maintained his rigid, stone-like face, Rickles got more material for his vicious jabs. If Clint Eastwood was just a hollow icon in Rickles' eyes, the next person on this list is a completely different story. 2. Dean Martin, the charming icon hiding an alcoholic's true nature. Dean Martin, the right-hand man of the Rat Pack, was the one Don Rickles loved to mock the most. To Rickles, Martin was the perfect example of someone who lived on his good looks and superficial humor instead of truly working hard at his craft. In the middle of his Las Vegas shows, Rickles didn't hesitate to call Martin Vegas's high-ass drunk. The audience roared, but everyone understood that Don Rickles was directly attacking the iconic image Dean Martin had painstakingly built, a gentleman with a whiskey glass in hand who would sing and flirt with women as if life were one endless party. Rickles despised that. To him, Martin was simply a naturally charming slacker. His singing voice was sweet but never refined to perfection, and his acting was mediocre but covered up by a humorous, spontaneous persona. Instead of practicing, Martin chose to hold a drink and let the crowd delude themselves into thinking they were watching a born talent. Rickles often mocked him to his face. Dean, you don't sing, you just yawn with a melody. Or, you succeeded by drinking more than you sang. If Las Vegas ever runs out of whiskey, your career is over. What frustrated Don Rickles most was that Dean Martin was celebrated by the whole world. At the time, Martin was the soul of the Rat Pack, the powerful group of artists who dominated Las Vegas. While Rickles had to work hard to build his career, all Martin needed was one witty remark to make the entire room go wild. On some nights, Rickles' roasts of Martin were so biting that the audience was shocked. Dean, you're so drunk that if the audience clapped for another minute, you'd think you're in a bar and order another drink. In his final days, Rickles still mentioned Dean Martin as one of the names that annoyed him to the bone. Martin represented the type of artist Rickles hated most, superficiality being deified and laziness being hailed as talent. But Rickles didn't just stop at those who lived by the bottle. To him, another famous person was even more deserving of condemnation. 3. Ronald Reagan, the talentless symbol who still reached power. In the 1960s, before he was president, Ronald Reagan was just a cellist actor who frequently appeared in clubs. And it was here that Don Rickles found his favorite prey. In Rickles' eyes, Reagan embodied everything he despised. No talent, just a smile and a mechanical way of reciting lines. Every time Reagan appeared, Rickles was fueled with new energy. Rickles once bitterly stated, "Ronnie, you were so bad in the movies that Hollywood had to push you into politics." Reagan was known for his composure, but those barbs bothered him. Backstage, Reagan once told a close friend that Rickles didn't know when to stop. Their relationship was always strained. Rickles saw Reagan as a master of faking it, while Reagan saw Rickles as an insolent clown who was only good at making noise. When Reagan became president in 1981, Rickles continued his attacks on national television. "Mr. President, I still remember you from those awful films. It's a miracle America chose a character actor to lead the world." For Rickles, Reagan was the perfect example of a burliest actor who transformed himself into an A-list political star. Every time Reagan appeared at a comedy show, Rickles didn't hesitate to fire away, "Ronnie, even the dog Lassie had more memorable roles than you." Or "You're the only president in history I believe could be replaced by a character actor." The bitter irony was that the more he was mocked, the more Reagan laughed. He saw it as a joke, while Rickles saw Reagan as the embodiment of a disgrace, a failure on screen who was celebrated by the world when he entered politics. He called Reagan the name that disgraced Hollywood. And that was the funniest play of the 20th century. The worst man on screen became the best actor in politics. To Don Rickles, Ronald Reagan was just the first proof that Hollywood could turn a nobody into an icon. And he wasn't the only one. 4. Frank Sinatra, the lounge king whose empire was built on the underworld. On the surface, Frank Sinatra and Don Rickles were close friends. Sinatra often took Rickles to the most luxurious restaurants in Las Vegas, introducing him to high rollers and casino moguls. Many even said that without Sinatra's backing, Rickles would never have made it out of the small comedy clubs to become a household name in America. But Sinatra was also Rickles' #1 victim on stage. In 1960s Las Vegas, when the mafia still held a tight grip on the casinos, no one dared to cross Sinatra, who was both the king of music and rumored to have ties to the underworld. And while the whole city bowed down, only Don Rickles dared to look up and mock him. "Frank, without the mafia, you'd just be a second-rate lounge singer." The entire room held its breath. People feared Rickles would be taken backstage and handled that very night. But contrary to expectations, Sinatra laughed and applauded. And Rickles became the only person in show business who could insult Sinatra and still walk away. Deep down, Don Rickles both admired and despised Frank Sinatra. In his eyes, Sinatra was clear proof of a power delusion. His God-given voice was undeniable, but Sinatra's legendary status was propped up by the shadow of the mafia and shady backstage connections. Rickles hated success that was built on power instead of pure talent. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to tear off his friend's glamorous suit right in front of the crowd. Sinatra, as always, laughed loudly, clapped, and acted forgivingly. But behind that smile, no one knew if it was truly the generosity of the lounge king or suppressed anger hidden in a glittering glass of whiskey. And if Frank Sinatra was a close but conflicted friend in the lavish circle of Vegas, Rickles' contempt was reserved for another figure, someone who was hailed as a graceful icon, but who in his eyes was a symbol of debauchery and alcoholism. 5. Bob Hope, the man who used laughter to hide his fakeness. To Don Rickles, Bob Hope, an icon of American comedy, was the embodiment of everything he despised in the art of comedy. Too sweet, too clean, too fake. Rickles once bitterly stated, "Bob Hope is so funny I fall asleep before he even walks on stage." While Hope chose safe jokes to please everyone, Rickles believed comedy had to be sharp, honest, and daring. To Rickles, Hope was just a perfect host, someone who knew how to make the audience laugh just enough, but who never dared to cross the line. That wasn't art. It was a manufactured product. Rickles often publicly taunted Hope with lethal blows. "Bob, you never offend anyone. But then again, you never make anyone laugh out loud either, or you're so safe that if you went to heaven, the angels would probably yawn from boredom." What Don Rickles hated most was how smart Bob Hope was at maintaining his long career. Rickles despised how Hope had turned comedy into a sweet, artificial syrup that anyone could easily swallow without thinking. While Rickles embraced risk, poking at pain and revealing the truth, Hope chose to pander to his audience, presenting a world of humor free of sharp edges. Rickles once venomously commented, "Bob Hope is the Disneyland of comedy. It's beautiful and shiny, but it has no truth." But on Don Rickles' blacklist, Hope was the ultimate fake, a person who turned laughter into a harmless commodity, hiding all the pain and truth that art should confront. To Rickles, Bob Hope's existence was an insult to real comedy. He saw Hope as proof of a Hollywood that favored dishonesty, safety, and complacency. And that's why in his final days, Rickles still referred to Bob Hope as one of the names that annoyed him to his core, a legend in the eyes of the world, but just a dull ghost in his. And it didn't stop there. While Bob Hope was the Disneyland of comedy too, polished American television had no shortage of other icons that rubbed Rickles the wrong way. 6. Johnny Carson. A TV legend, but was his talent worth the hype? In the 1970s and 1980s, Johnny Carson was the most powerful figure on American television. He was hailed by audiences as the king of late night, the man who could make millions laugh every night with just a raised eyebrow. But in the cynical eyes of Don Rickles, Johnny Carson was just a dull host who lived by the script and had no real spark. Despite Carson giving him many opportunities to shine, that professional friendship couldn't stop Rickles from despising Carson. In front of an audience, Rickles once mercilessly mocked, "Johnny, you're so charming that your wife left you." And the audience still didn't notice. The entire studio audience burst out laughing. Rickles continued to jab at Carson live on air. "Johnny, you're so serious that if you had an accident, you'd turn it into a news report, not a laugh." He added, "You're not a comedian, Johnny. You're just a host." Who was lucky enough to have the longest seat in television history. What Rickles hated most about Carson was his smugness. In Rickles' eyes, Carson always played it safe, saying just enough and never daring to break the mold to truly surprise the audience. Carson was a master at controlling the atmosphere, but Rickles saw that as a form of deception, a way of tricking the public into thinking he was the king of comedy when he was in reality just the king of the script. Backstage, Johnny Carson was known for being reclusive and hard to approach. Don Rickles once bluntly quipped, "Johnny, you're so reclusive that even your own shadow doesn't want to talk to you." A bitter friendship existed between them. Carson needed Rickles to create explosive laughs for his show, and Rickles needed Carson as the perfect backdrop to unleash his roasts. But the more he appeared, the more Rickles despised him. He saw Carson as an empty shell, a legend built from studio lights, not from genuine stage presence. And that's why on his final blacklist, Rickles didn't forget to include Johnny Carson, a professional friend, a television icon, but in his eyes, the dullest host in the history of American comedy. But American television didn't just have kings. It also had queens figures praised for their sharpness and wit, but who in Rickles' eyes were just an annoying thorn. 7. Joan Rivers, the queen of mean and a hard-to-swallow thorn for Don Rickles. In American comedy, Joan Rivers was famous as the queen of mean, sharp, acid-tinged, and unafraid of anyone. But it was that very style that made her a constant target for Don Rickles. If Rickles was the king of direct insults, Rivers was the queen of tearing down, and her existence felt like a direct competition that Rickles couldn't stomach. From their very first time on a Las Vegas stage together, Don Rickles felt that Joan Rivers was not on the same wavelength. He saw her as someone who only used cruelty to shock the audience, rather than skillfully maintaining the line between insulting and laughing. Because of this, Rickles often made Rivers a priority target. "Joan, if you get any uglier, Vegas will put up a permanent sign banning you." The audience roared with laughter, but Joan Rivers' face turned red. To Rickles, this wasn't just a harmless joke. It reflected genuine contempt. He felt Joan only knew how to use her appearance and a scalpel-sharp tongue to get attention with no artistic depth. Rickles didn't stop there. In many shows, he constantly attacked Joan. Joan doesn't need to look in the mirror to put on makeup. She looks in the mirror to insult herself. Or she's had so much plastic surgery that if the power went out, her whole face could crash like a broken computer system. The crowd laughed, but everyone recognized this as a hidden duel between two masters of insult comedy. One who had become a legend and one who was solidifying her position as the Queen of Mean. For her part, Joan Rivers didn't back down. Backstage, she once retorted, "Don Rickles isn't Mr. Warmth, he's Mr. Acid. If you're near him for too long, your soul might melt." This quote quickly spread, turning their tension into a topic of conversation. Two comedians who used the same weapon but hated each other because each believed the other had ruined the art form. To Rickles, Rivers was the symbol of unsubtle imitation. He hated that the public hailed her as his female version, while he believed Rivers had turned insult comedy into brutal, graceless jabs that even tarnished the genre's image. To the audience, Joan Rivers was a comedy queen, but in Rickles' eyes, she was just a noisy shadow. Someone who used insults for fame, but never achieved the grace of true insult comedy. And while Joan Rivers was the queen of mean, who Rickles saw as a disgrace to the genre, Hollywood had another clown whom he despised even more, someone the world worshipped, but whom Rickles saw as an eye-popping absurdity. 8. Jerry Lewis, the noisy clown Rickles despised. In the 1950s and 1960s, Jerry Lewis was considered a phenomenon by the whole world. With his mischievous face, high-pitched voice, and exaggerated physical comedy, he made audiences roar with laughter in his slapstick films. Hollywood hailed Lewis as a comedy genius, while the French press put him on par with Charlie Chaplin. But in Don Rickles' eyes, all that praise was a mistaken deification. To him, Jerry Lewis wasn't a genius, but just a pandering show-off. Rickles believed comedy had to be honest and daring enough to poke at pain and truth. As for Lewis, he just had to scream trip or make a stupid face to make the crowd howl with laughter. Rickles once mocked him in front of thousands of people. Jerry doesn't do comedy. Jerry just screams and hopes the audience thinks it's funny. That line was like a knife stabbing straight into the slapstick style that Lewis had worked hard to build. In Rickles' eyes, Lewis's antics and distorted faces were nothing more than a cheap carnival where laughter was bought with exaggeration, not intelligence. Rickles added, "Jerry Lewis makes kids laugh. Adults, they just get tired. And he's the reason I hate 1950s Hollywood comedies." But what Rickles hated most was the beamed adoration from France. When the Parisian media praised Lewis as a genius, Rickles scoffed. If France thinks Jerry Lewis is a genius, they probably think snails are pizza. In his final days, when looking back on his career, Don Rickles still mentioned Jerry Lewis in an unhappy tone. On his blacklist, Lewis was proof of one thing: not every legend is art. Sometimes it's just absurdity that terrifyingly is worshipped by the public. But what truly haunts the public is the question, why did Don Rickles, who never shied away from lashing out at Frank Sinatra, Ronald Reagan, or Clint Eastwood, keep his blacklist a secret for decades? And why did he wait until his final years when he was almost 90 to reveal the truth? The answer lies in Rickles' true nature. On stage, he was Mr. Warmth, bitterly insulting but able to make the entire room laugh. But offstage, Rickles knew the fine line between a joke and a condemnation. In 1960s Las Vegas, a wrong word aimed at a powerful person could make a comedian disappear overnight. Rickles once walked that tightrope with Sinatra and survived thanks to the mob boss's applause. But he understood that publicly hating someone in real life wasn't a joke. It was a battle that could destroy a career. Rickles chose silence because his career needed laughter, not enemies. He knew that once the blacklist was released, it would no longer be art. It would turn into personal animosity, leading to arguments and even real danger. For years, he turned his contempt into stage material mocking Reagan, ridiculing Dean Martin, and attacking Bob Hope. But it was all a public joke to protect himself. However, as time passed, that silence became a burden. When he was at the end of the road, Rickles had nothing left to lose. Without the stage lights or an audience waiting to laugh, he confronted himself and the bitterness he'd hidden his entire life. The list for Rickles wasn't just who I hate. It was an indictment of an entire entertainment industry he saw as fake, unfair, and full of false worship. He revealed it because he wanted the truth to be recorded, a truth no longer covered by laughter. These were no longer jokes, but a final confession that behind the applause and roaring laughter, Don Rickles still held in his heart the names he considered symbols of falsehood, laziness, and meaningless deification. And perhaps only in his twilight years did he have the courage to admit that he had lived his whole life with thorns in his heart. Sinatra, a close friend who relied on the mafia. Reagan, a second-rate actor turned president. Dean Martin, a celebrated drunkard. Clint Eastwood, a stone-faced legend. Bob Hope, sweetly fake. Johnny Carson, the dull king of the script. Jerry Lewis, the absurd clown who was canonized. His entire life, Rickles turned hatred into art. He hid it behind jokes, attacking people on stage with sarcasm to make the audience roar. He lived as if he didn't truly hate anyone, as if it was all just humor. But behind the laughter was a bitterness he never spoke of. It was only at the end of his life, when he had nothing to lose, that Rickles let his true feelings return to their proper form. A blacklist bitter raw with no humorous facade to hide behind. No longer a joke to make people laugh, but a confession that made people shudder. It was not just about who Don Rickles hated to his core. It was an indictment he delivered against an entertainment industry full of injustice and falsehood. It was the last sigh of a man who lived his entire life in the spotlight, but who never stopped despising the fake idols built by blind deification. And so, in his final days, Don Rickles was no longer Mr. Warmth. He returned to being a raw, cynical Don Rickles who didn't need to make jokes for laughs, but just needed to speak the truth that all his life he had lived with these thorns, and until the very end they had never disappeared. Perhaps that cynicism was the true confession of his entire career. But after the names on the blacklist were exposed, what remained was not just contempt, but a question. What did Don Rickles ultimately leave the world beyond those bitter jabs? All secrets eventually lead to a single word: legacy. His legacy isn't in a collection of random jokes, but in the way he redefined the very nature of American comedy. Before, Rickles' comedy often revolved around safe situations and stories meant to make the audience comfortable. After Rickles, people realized that laughter could come from raw truth, from daring to touch on the most difficult things. He paved the way for a generation of insult comedy, from comedians in Las Vegas and New York to rebellious faces on American television. The strange thing is that in real life, Rickles was a gentle person devoted to his family, loving his wife and children so much that he never had a single scandal throughout his decades-long career. Friends said that after his brutal onstage roasts, Rickles was often the first to shake hands, hug, and say thank you. That was the paradox that created his allure, a warm heart hidden beneath a cynical exterior. Rickles also left his mark on film and television, from his supporting role in Run Silent, Run Deep, 1958, and the series CPO Sharky, to voicing the character of Mr. Potato Head in the Toy Story movies, which introduced him to a younger generation. But above all, it was the nights in Las Vegas where he held a microphone and spoke to the world that he truly shined. Don Rickles' legacy isn't just the art of the roast. It's also a life philosophy that sometimes the hard truth needs to be exposed with laughter. He proved that when done gracefully, even the most biting insults can become a form of liberation, allowing the audience to laugh at the fakeness and absurdity around them. And perhaps that's why he waited until the end of his life to reveal his bitter blacklist. Not to show hatred, but for the world to understand that after the laughter is the truth, and after the truth is a person who lived fully with his satirical wit. Don Rickles was more than a comedian. He was living proof of an artist who dared to turn bitterness into laughter and to say the things the whole world avoided. For nearly 7 decades, Rickles never bowed to anyone. Not to Sinatra, not to Reagan, not to Hollywood, and not to the sweet standards audiences were used to. He walked on stage with a single principle: the truth must be exposed. And laughter is the scalpel that dissects falsehood. But Rickles was also a man of paradoxes. He roasted the world but was gentle with his family. He was a Las Vegas assassin on stage, but a loyal friend in real life. He mocked legends, but he also became one himself. When Don Rickles passed away in 2017, Hollywood didn't just lose a comedian. The world lost a raw, unvarnished mirror that showed both the glory and the fakeness of the entertainment industry. He left a legacy not through blockbuster movies or memorable roles, but through a style no one dared to replicate. A style of absolute honesty, where insults were transformed into artistic legacy. Today, in the memory of millions of fans, Don Rickles is more than just the roasts that made people cry with laughter. He has become an indelible echo, a reminder that the art of comedy only truly lives on when it dares to go to the very heart of the truth. Not through pandering and not through safe laughter, but through sharp stabs that touch on pain and turn it into a moment of release. Perhaps by daring to be so true to his core, Rickles became immortal. He didn't just make people laugh, he exposed them. He didn't just mock, he shined a light on them. And for more than half a century on stage, Rickles proved one thing: laughter can be cruel, but it's that very cruelty that keeps it honest. He passed away in 2017, concluding a 90-year journey of glory and bitterness. But his legacy lives on in every quip repeated on talk shows, in every burst of laughter that erupts when people listen to old recordings. Every time that laughter echoes, it's as if Rickles is still there sitting on stage, squinting and delivering a joke that makes the whole room go silent before it explodes. A legend's life has come to an end, but his laughter will never be silenced. It still echoes in the memories of Hollywood and backstage stories and in the hearts of those who once heard him roast them and still laughed. Don Rickles is no longer present in flesh and bone, but he lives on through the most important thing an artist can leave behind: an irreplaceable legacy in the history of American comedy. If the secrets behind the spotlight have surprised you, then get ready. Behind the curtains of Hollywood, there are countless untold stories, truths that could shock you even more.